Bujuani, Ishpigage Jabique, Indigenous Zaganashi Mung, Mukwa Ninodem, Nagachi Wanang Najunjaba. My name is Karen Diver, my English name. My Anishinaabe tribal name, Morning Sky Woman. I am of the Bear Clan from the Anishinaabe people, the original people from the head of the big water. That would be Minnesota, if you haven't figured out by the accent. Of course, that's the settler name for it. I was its chairwoman there for quite a long time. So I have an interesting perspective on some of this because I was a lot of you. I was the boots on the ground with running a tribal government in an indigenous community and having citizens who were also my aunties and my parents and my children and all of the rest of my relatives, my clan affiliation. And then after I was chairwoman, I had the interesting perspective of working for the settler colonizer government. I was actually the special assistant to the president under the Obama administration for Native American affairs. So I advised the president on his Native American portfolio. People who work in traditional government in the US, they couldn't have imagined how far those spectrums are apart, right? To me, it felt a little bit like infiltrating from outside, because for so long we see those systems from, especially the federal and state level, they weren't built for us, right? They were there to perpetuate the settler state. But I had just come from fighting all of those systems as a tribal leader, and now I'm the man, right, so to speak. I wasn't going to go willingly, and I wasn't going to go quietly. They knew what they were getting when they asked a chairwoman to help make federal policies around Native American affairs. I knew everything that didn't work, right? And what didn't work was, I'm actually going to challenge that term, reimagining public administration. I think what we need to do is remember who we were before, because we've been inexorably changed by all of this contact and how it was set up to oppress, minimize, enslave, whatever it may be. But we've done this. Our resiliency is that we're still here and that we know who we are and the people that we came from. With that, I need to apologize. I forgot to thank the traditional owners. I was so busy trying to remember to do the right thing to introduce myself properly. I apologize. Thank you to the traditional owners. I give you my respect for your elders, past, present, and emerging. Anyway, for my elders, past, present, and emerging, I felt a burden, right? I stood on their shoulders and they survived. And so my job was to caretake who was there currently and look forward and fighting those existing systems, right? So whether it was around natural resources and extractive industries and what that might do to water. So what do? We exercised water quality regulations within our homelands and any waters that flowed into us. And we worked within existing federal systems to take that jurisdiction back because that was important to us. So in terms of remembering where we came from, it was that we were caretakers of our lands. And it really was about our survival. And it was about wellness in a really big way, right? And that we all had that role to play, whether we were healers, leaders, hunter-gatherers, food. So how does that translate for the Anishinaabe people today? We need to make sure there's good quality food. Pollution ruins that. We have a right under our treaties to hunt, fish, and gather. Is that treaty being honored if those fish are contaminated? Or the waters are contaminated and those rights aren't there? So we built systems to protect natural resources and pushed hard on our jurisdictions within those other governmental systems. Sometimes we litigated. Sometimes we expanded our science so that we could argue with non-native scientists that they didn't understand exactly what was happening in our homelands. We came to learn them better than they knew them because we invested in them in a different way, not for extractive industries to exploit them, but to caretake them. That's remembering who we are. That's indigenizing your government and finding that cultural fit like Miriam was talking about. So how does that work in with that federal system, right? Because we are federal entities, federal to federal, and then we have those local state jurisdictions, right? You know, you do what you can when you talk about co-design and co-management. That only really works if the other side actually listens and follows through. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about dispute resolution and where do you go to? Whatever lengths you need to. It could be as simple as Standing Rock standing firm to protect their water. It could be litigating up to the Supreme Court. It can be advocating within legislative processes for new laws. So it's really kind of a battle on all fronts, right? At the federal level, the Obama administration was really the best administration that what we term Indian country had ever really known in terms of respecting tribal governments. But even that was really tough, right? Because once again, none of those systems were built for us. But what they did respect is that they had to meet tribes where they were at, and that an investment really needed to be made to enable tribes to develop the scope of those authorities. If you wanted to regulate water, you could. And we will provide resources and technical assistance and help you develop those partnerships. If that's not something you want and you'd like to do something else, you'd like to take control of your tribal school, funding was flexibility, the design of those things end up coming from tribes, and it's not a negotiated process. You meet minimum standards, and beyond that, it falls under that tribal control. So rather than a language requirement, you do language immersion in your Head Start program, right? Things like that. Talking a bit about the challenges of working within these larger systems and trends, nation building for us actually means occupying traditionally non-native spaces these days. We can be as strong as we can be as individual nations operating within the US, and none of that matters if we can't hold the systems that are there that make the rules accountable. I was having some conversations earlier saying that one of my things that I always pushed at as a tribal leader was to tell other elected leaders and remind them that my citizens were their citizens too. And that they didn't get to abdicate their responsibility for taking care of my citizens based on their race or their political status. They are yours too. I will tell everyone that you are a failure in your job because you are leaving some of your citizens behind. And we need to keep saying that these systems that are there that we did not build still represent the citizens of Indigenous communities. We all know that that doesn't work always. So take those jobs. We have a lieutenant governor in Minnesota right now that is an Anishinaabe woman. Their first budget came out 3 days ago with huge investments into tribal communities, education, all of those things that tribes want, language, social services. They have high-placed ranking natives within their cabinet. Finally, we're catching up with some of you, and we have our first 2 Native women legislators in the federal government. They joined 2 men that were there previously, but they weren't real good at it. Well, you know, truth hurts. But we also see an amazing number running for state legislators, legislative positions, and things like that. Do we want to take them over? No, but we should be represented. When we talked, earlier, we talked about the levels of disparities, and if we are going to make majority institutions work for us, then somehow we need to be heard, and it hasn't worked from the outside. And so to have those voice in the tables. One of the things that this administration did in Minnesota is every state legislator 2 days ago, they had a sovereignty day on the Capitol. All 11 federally recognized tribes from within Minnesota were in that room and training legislators on their responsibility to their tribal citizens. That's a great start, right? Because you can't take care of the things you don't know or that you've ignored. And at least you can figure out who doesn't care. And then you run for that seat. right? You find your candidate and run for that seat. So a part of all of this reimagining government is also reimagining the majority culture's government. And how do we take our place and our power in those systems as well, so that we don't have to be worrying about which party is in power, because it doesn't matter, because our people are there too. So political activism, building your own systems of government and stretching them as far as you can, but basing all of that on who you know you are and what has been important for your people for tens and tens of thousands of years. Remembering those ancestors by emulating your ancestors. Thank you.